Milk Metaverse is a metaverse platform for the media industry that will bridge the gap between the content producers and the audience. Mediaverse from Milk Platform will be a combination of virtual reality, blockchain technology, and artificial intelligence. Visit the website metaverse.milk.global.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It's Adrian's Doing to CryptoBurb talking to you straight from the other side of the screen. Welcome to the last and final day of our Free Trading Congress. This is an annual event. It's become an overall tradition that we hosted in November's. And last year's November is actually very different to what we are looking at right now, right? There is definitely a lot of bearish market history going on for the entire of 2022, which definitely did not help many people, just stay on the surface of the market and stay on top of the things following the Terra Luna crash collapse, as well as the FTX frauds coming up. This has been a wild journey. But luckily, I'm joined by my great guests, Daniel Batten and Quentin Francois. But before we go and discover the deepest secrets of the future of Bitcoin and what potentially may be letting ahead, I'll tease you with a little bit of a nice, great intro. Welcome again. Free Trading Congress Day 8. This is a little bit of a bonus because I probably lied a little bit. I promised to you guys that it's going to take 7 days, but apparently we are here on day 8, and this is the final day. This is one of the final shows, and I'm joined by the legends. I'm joined by great one and only Daniel Batten, who is a climate activist, one of the best and the most proficient Bitcoin environmentalists, basically in the scene that I know, and who become great inspiration for me to get also interested in this environmental aspects for Bitcoin, as well as Quentin Francois, who's my great friend, an amazing author, great Bitcoinist, and an amazing professional. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, thank you for the invite, Adrian. I was going to say Crypto Burp. I was just reading names. But I think like 8 days, it's a lot, but you can probably fill like an entire year with talking about crypto. So 8 days, I think you could still keep it in a nutshell.
Yeah. It's been a wild journey, and preparing such an amazing, immense virtual event actually, I think, brings one and only chance and opportunity to so many people, to get back on their feet, to recover. Of course, not just because of us saying so, but because of the insane amount of knowledge that they are getting, the wealth of actual experience that you, ladies and gentlemen, are also going to get within today's show while discussing the features of Bitcoin. And well, we have so much on the stake, so much to be discussed. So let me roll in immediately and give to our respected guests the chance to introduce yourself, to the audience. Let's start with Daniel, please.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. So I got into Bitcoin pretty late in the piece. So 2017, and then in a bigger way, 2020. And came from a background where I did a lot of climate activism. And from there went into climate tech VC. And in parallel to that, I also had a number of different startup companies that I was part of, either as an early employee, then I founded my own one, which exited 3 years ago. So a combination of getting involved in technology investment and climate activism, and also did a lot of coaching of other technology entrepreneurs. So the things I write about now is a chance to bring all of those things together.
I love it. How about yourself, Quentin?
Yeah, I've been in the crypto space since late 2016, and early 2017, I started my YouTube channel. So I did that mainly for the first 4 years, and then since the middle of last year, so 1.5 years, I switched to Twitter. So there, I keep like spreading my knowledge, spreading my opinion on things. And aside from that, I wrote a book, which is a best-selling Dutch book on crypto. So I'm more proud of that than on my follower base, to be fair. And I also have like a Web3 startup right now named Whereat. And I'm doing talks. I'm working with the government, etc. So everything Web3 and crypto related.
Hopefully not the same way working with government like Sam Bankman did, right?
We'll
That's
see.
that's what I hope. That's what I hope, man. I mean, otherwise I'm not getting you back on the show anytime soon. So. No, in all honesty, I mean, I'm so excited again for you, Daniel. It's actually a second appearance, and lots changed since actually, we sat down to together to talk and discuss the Bitcoin environmental aspect, and I got inspired and baffled and really blown away by the amount of knowledge I've been missing, that I've been missing for years in terms of recognizing, anything that happens on such an important field, in such an important field that this environment is. And apparently there is not only the threat aspect to it, but so many opportunities, right? So let's open up the thread for the discussion for whether or not Bitcoin is sustainable. And in your opinion, is Bitcoin sustainable right now, Daniel?
Yeah. So the simple answer is any technology, it really depends on how you're using it. And so you can absolutely, it's possible to use Bitcoin in a way which is totally unsustainable. And there are some examples of some Bitcoin miners who use it in a way which is not sustainable. And there's also a number of examples of Bitcoin miners who use it in a way which is sustainable. And so depending on what your information source is, depending on what your politics are, depending on the group of people who you tend to mix out with, you'll either tend to focus on the ones who are mining it in a sustainable way or an unsustainable way. So I'm not interested in either of those. What I'm interested in as an analyst is looking at the data and saying, what does the data tell us? And so the interesting thing is what the data tells us is very different from the media narrative. And why is that? Well, it's because, as you probably know, good news doesn't sell. I think there was a paper in Russia one time that did an experiment for a week, and they said, we're only going to sell good news. We're only going to print good news for the whole week. And by the end of the week, it was just about out of business. So it said, guys, let's right the ship, experiment over. We're going to go back to what we used to do, which is headlines that sell. So the reality is that if you have an example of some Bitcoin mining company that opened some plant that used to be fossil fuel, and you can say how terrible this is for the environment, then that'll be a very emotive headline that'll capture a lot of attention, that'll get a lot of clicks. If you write a paper that says, hey, this Bitcoin mining company has just gone solar, I mean, people might be interested in it, but people aren't going to click it as much. They're not going to have such a strong emotional reaction to it. It's not going to be so successful. And so what you have to do is very quickly set aside what is the natural business model or bias of media channels and actually look at the information. And so the interesting thing is that if you look at Bitcoin miners right now, at the moment, if you look at, let's say, the sources which you'd say are the least sustainable, so coal, as of 2023, the number of Bitcoin mining companies that are using coal at a significant level as a sole source of power is 1. There'll be 1. The number that are using either renewable or carbon negative sources is 31. Now, that's very different to what you hear in the media. So that's a 31-to-1 ratio. So the interesting thing is that Bitcoin mining overall, when you look at the data as opposed to the media narrative, 2 things. Yes, you can find examples of it being used sustainably and unsustainably, absolutely. Secondly, when you look at the data, it's much more strongly sustainable than unsustainable, number 2. And the third thing is the trend line, and we can go into the details of this later, is definitely trending towards sustainable. And I say this warrants some further attention because there is some research out there, reputable research, third-party research from an academic institute, and that's the Cambridge Centre for Alternative Finance, that has said that it's trending in a less sustainable direction. However, my own research says the opposite, and either now or later we can go into the reasons for that.
Okay,
Daniel,
I could hear you, Daniel, talk for hours. This is such an amazing. I feel enriched already by this. But what is that you were attempting to speak out there, Quentin?
Yeah, I was going to ask, like Daniel, that one company, how many percent of the total energy usage of Bitcoin is this? How big are they?
In terms of exahash, it would be 2.3%.
2.3%.
And it's an interesting story. So this one here, so there's basically three that get used again and again when you're looking at the negative story, the coal ones. So one is Stronghold, the other one is Greenwich, and the third one is Marathon. Marathon are actually migrating from coal to solar and wind by the end of 2023. That's quite extraordinary because in order to migrate, they've actually had to exit their power purchase agreement early, which almost never happens. So that comes, normally there'll be, I don't know the exact contractual terms, but if you exit a power purchase agreement early, normally it costs you, normally there'll be some exit clause, you have to pay your way out. So that will come at a cost to do that. They didn't have to do that. They could have easily taken the line that we're trying to do the best thing, but we're locked into a power purchase agreement. They didn't. They ripped it up early, and they are migrating by the end of this year. The second one, which was reported as a coal plant, when you look into it, was actually it had stopped functioning as a coal plant, and they've reopened it as a natural gas plant. Now, as an environmentalist, I'm still would prefer that wasn't the case because that's still fossil fuel. And the reality is that if you look at the grid throughout the world, the grid is a combination of coal, fossil fuel, and basically whatever is powering that grid in that local area. And if you look at the data around the world, anyone who's using electricity, the number one source of power for that electricity in the world today is still coal throughout the world. Some countries it'll be hydro, some countries it'll be gas, but across the entire world, the major source of generating electricity right now is coal. So another thing you'll hear a lot is people say, well, Bitcoin is using a lot of coal. And what it actually means is Bitcoin is using a lot of electricity. And it just so happens that the source of that electricity is coal. So it's really more of a statement of how we use electricity than it is about Bitcoin as a specific user. So it's one of these data points that gets pulled out of context. Because you could say that about anything. You could say that your lights are using mainly coal, so they're bad, or your charging of cell phones are bad because they're using electricity, and electricity comes mainly from coal. So you could actually use that out of anything out there that uses electricity. So the other thing that I see a lot is I see examples of misinformation, and misinformation is when you're taking things out of context in order to create a misleading narrative. So the one that is remaining then, the actual one that will still be in place by the end of 2023, a company called Stronghold. And that's an interesting story because yes, they are using, actually it's a waste product from the coal industry. And so what they're doing is around the US and around the world, there's been these examples where people have used coal and then they've stopped using coal because it's no longer profitable or because they've used all the good coal and there's only the stuff that isn't so good quality left. And it leaves an environmental wasteland. And so the product which is left, it's called GOB or waste coal or coal tailings sometimes. That gets into the ground, it poisons the ground, it poisons the water nearby. The citizens, the community cannot use that land for anything. And it can also catch on fire. And when it catches on fire, it releases a whole lot of nasties, including different sulfur compounds. It also releases a lot of methane into the atmosphere. And so what this company are doing is they're actually providing, so two things. You could say it has a negative externality because it's still burning coal, which is releasing emissions into the air. At the same time, the locals regard it as a benefit to the local environment because it's reclaiming that land, it's stopping that coal from poisoning the groundwater, and it's stopping the risk of it catching on fire and releasing all sorts of compounds, and including methane. So, as you can see, there's not a lot overall, and the last new one was at the start of 2021. So it's been 18 months and there's been nothing new that's been fed off that as a power source in that time. But over that same time, there's been more than a dozen new renewable operators who have come online. So you can start to see the direction that it's trending.
Yeah, and I think that's also important, Daniel, because I think this trend is mainly what people should focus on. Because if you look to what the media focuses on, for example, politics, electricity in general, nobody is like focusing on the trend that Bitcoin is going. They're like only focusing on the fact that there is still some like coal usage, etc., but not the fact that, for example, 50%, nearly 50%, or around 50%, you probably know the number better than me, is coming from renewable sources already, while the world average of electricity is only like around 20%. So
Yeah, right.
then they start bashing on Bitcoin, while they cannot expect Bitcoin to like to go like this from 50% to 100%. It takes time, but it's going in the right direction and they're pushing hard. It's going faster than like the rest of the world. And that is what they should focus on. This trend is good. They're like leading the push to renewable energy. And that's what media often forgets. And that's also that these are just the facts. And of course, you cannot expect it to be like at 100% already, but you cannot expect it from the rest of the world as well. Well, it's sitting at 20% right now. So it doesn't make any sense to me. And it's like, it's a very invalid thing. But like you said, it's all about like reporting and research as well, because I think most journalists right now that write articles about these topics, they literally don't know anything about it. They like dive into it for a few hours and that's it. The first thing they find, that's what they write about, and that's it. Or like the sensational stuff. And that's, of course, like a fundamental problem in the media as well, that they're looking for sensation, but there's also like a lot of pressure for these journalists to know everything about anything, you know? That's not going to work.
Yeah. The analogy I like to use is there's some data at the moment which says that New Zealand and one other Scandinavian country are the least corrupt in the world. I don't know exactly how they measure that and get that data, but coming from New Zealand, it's a nice statistic that we like to remind people of. And that doesn't mean there's not corruption in New Zealand. There's plenty of corruption in New Zealand. So you have this interesting phenomenon where there's corruption in New Zealand, and relative to the rest of the world, it's the number one country for being uncorrupt. Now, imagine you had, for some reason, you wanted to create a narrative that New Zealand was a corrupt country. What would you need to do? Well, you need to do two things. Firstly, you need to make sure that the research that it was the number one least corrupt in the world never reached anyone. So you just not report that. That'd be the first thing. And the second thing you would do is you would find a lot of instances, stories, exceptions, where there was corruption in New Zealand, and you'd print them and you'd circulate them routinely. And every time you found an instance of it, you would do it multiple times in multiple different newspapers. And that would be what got attention. And this really describes exactly what has happened to Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is similar. Bitcoin is, you're quite correct, it's the number one user right now of renewable energy in the world. There isn't a single energy user out there in the world as an industry that is anywhere close to Bitcoin in terms of renewable energy adoption. So that's fantastic. Now, just like New Zealand has corruption, does that mean it's perfect? Of course not. There are many imperfections. There always will be. You've got humans, and wherever you have humans, you'll have imperfections. And so what tends to happen is the media will say, okay, so there's this terrible example of a fossil fuel plant using Bitcoin right now. And Bitcoiners, unfortunately, will tend to make a mistake, and they'll tend to defend, and they'll say, well, hang on, because so-and-so over here, they're much worse than we are. And that's actually quite easy to counter. You can say, well, look, everyone's got to do their part, and it's no use pointing the finger at someone else. What about you? And that's actually correct. But Bitcoiners get really frustrated, of course, because it's like, well, hang on a minute. We're doing so well. Why are we getting all this attention? Why are we getting this bad rap? It's not fair, all the rest of it. And then you start, if you're not careful, you can start looking angry and start looking like you're trying to justify yourself when you're defensive and you're on the back foot. And you think, how did this happen in the first place? So what's important is, rather than take that approach, Number one, you've got to let people know the research. You've got to let them know, yes, we are actually right now the number one renewable in the world. And number two is about accepting and saying, and you're right, there are some examples of where it hasn't been used in a sustainable way. And yes, we need to do our part. Everyone needs to do their part. And as a network, we're committed to working in that way. And then it's saying, hey, and so long as we're going to look at the environmental narrative, we need to look at it in a full way. We need to look at it in context. So here is the context. And then you talk about the trend line. You talk about the information they don't know, which is, did you know, for example, there are 31 people who are mining off renewable sources at the moment, which is, there's only one right now of size, which is using coal as a source. And did you know that it's trending in a positive direction? Now, I want to look at this trend line as well, because that's an important one, because some people say, well, hang on, that's nonsense. It's not trending in a positive direction. The only people who say it's trending positive is the Bitcoin Mining Council, and they're an industry body. So, of course, they're going to say that. They're biased. They can say, oh, well, they're using self-reported data, and that's not statistically robust. And those criticisms are justified because they are an industry body and they do use self-reported data, and that wouldn't stand up to academic scrutiny. So there's some valid things to say there. However, if you look at the other reporting, which is done by Cambridge, yes, they're using a methodology which would stand up to more academic scrutiny. However, the other thing is there's actually a major portion of the network which the Cambridge data is not measuring. So the Cambridge data basically says that after the China ban, Bitcoin says three things. Number one, they say that the amount of renewable energy used, renewable plus zero emissions, so renewable and nuclear together, is 36.7%. So they give a much lower figure than the Bitcoin Mining Council, which gives 59%. So you think, well, how is that different? How can two people report something which is more than 20% different? That's a huge difference. And it was a question that I was interested in as well. How can two different bodies come up with such different answers? So I started to dig into the weeds and look at each methodology. And over the last 6 months, I've been chipping away at really starting to get to the sense of what is the true picture of the Bitcoin network. And of course, it's impossible to get a true picture because sometimes it's hard to locate where these people are doing mining. There's some miners that are under the radar, but we can start to get a fairly accurate picture at a high level. And what we've got to do is we need to take something into consideration, which has been a real trend lately, and that is that the whole network has moved towards off-grid. So most Bitcoin miners right now are not mining on-grid. Why? Because it's not profitable. At the Bitcoin price at the moment, it's just not profitable to mine on-grid. So they're moving off-grid. And minimum 55% is off-grid right now. The Cambridge data is measuring, the method they use is they look at where the miners are located, and then they look at what the grid mix is for that country. So if a miner is located in the US and Texas, and the grid mix of Texas is whatever it is, then they'll multiply the relative grid mix, the amount of coal there is, the amount of, there's no hydro there, the amount of natural gas, the amount of wind, the amount of solar, the amount of nuclear, and they'll come up with a mix of that area. And then they'll do the same in another country, then another country, then another country. Now, the problem with that is that if you're mining off-grid, so say, for example, you're in Canada and you have a power purchase agreement with to take curtailed hydro energy, you'll be using 100% hydro. But the Cambridge methodology will show that you're not, that you're using less than that because it will look at the standard grid mix for Canada. And so that data, the interesting thing is it's only measuring the on-grid portion of the Bitcoin network, which is only 45%. And the reason that it looks as though Bitcoin has got less renewable is that after the China ban, Bitcoin miners moved to areas which, compared to where they were in China, where they were using a lot of curtailed hydro, they were also using coal, but they were using a lot of curtailed hydro as well. They moved to countries which their grid mix was less than before. But as you can see, you've actually got to look at, well, what's the off-grid component? And when you factor that in, what are the people who are using off-grid, and you factor that into the mix too, you get a very different picture, and you get two worlds. So you get this on-grid world that's, yes, it's using about 37% renewable and zero emission. But then you have this off-grid world, which is more than half of the entire network, and they're using 74% zero emission. So that's a massive skew. And when you put those two things together, if they were the same, it wouldn't matter. And you could say, hey, Cambridge's model is okay. But they're not the same. It's almost a 2-to-1 skew. In fact, it is a 2-to-1 skew between the on-grid use of renewables and the off-grid. And when you combine those two numbers together and you put them together, you get a number which is more than 50%. And that's important because a lot of the negative media attention will say, well, we could handle Bitcoin mining if we thought that it was getting more renewable, number one. The second thing is because when you exclude the off-grid users and it's using standard grid mix, well, we've already talked about what standard grid mix is. It's mainly coal. So it looks as if the main energy source of Bitcoin is coal because it's using the grid. That's also incorrect because it's not only using the grid. And so these are the two aspects that will get picked up on repeatedly. However, they're just not accurate. It's not based on a complete data set. So it's incredibly important. I'm going to be publishing some of this research very soon because it's critically important that people understand that whilst the Bitcoin Mining Council's methodology from an academic point of view is not as robust, yes, whilst they are an industry body, the accuracy they've come up with is actually much more accurate. My own figures are slightly less than the Bitcoin Mining Council. So it's like you have this body over here, an academic body. And by the way, Cambridge's model for a long time was the right model. And 2 years ago, it was really accurate, but it's a little bit like a quant trading algorithm that's really good, but over time, it's lost its tune. And that's what's happened. So any model is only, as you know, in the trading world, will only work, it has a use by date. It has to be updated. So it's not that they're doing some terrible work, they're doing some great work. It's simply that, and they're also aware of this. They are aware on their website and they say, look, we do not publish the off-grid mining. We do not take into consideration people who are using carbon negative sources such as flared gas. And they're also saying that, yes, this is on our agenda to fix.
So we know there is a lot of misinformation, right? I mean, it seems that there is, not enough accuracy actually, again, in this overall mainstream regime that is being introduced that helps actually fight the Bitcoin, overall opportunities much more than actually allow them in. So what do we actually just say, Quentin, to all, the bodies? Because you said you would stand up to work with the governments, even if it takes it, to kind of like go and fix this Bitcoin narrative. So what do you tell them? Like, what are the benefits of Bitcoin that you introduce to those people?
First of all, it strongly depends who you're talking with. If I'm talking like with people from the left side of the political, how you say it, like spectrum, yeah. Then you can talk more about like the thing of the unbanked, for example, that 25% of the world is unbanked, which most politicians are totally unaware of. Because they're not interesting for banks to have them as a client, to have an account to their bank, because they cannot take like a loan, for example. They barely have any money, so they say like, yeah, you cannot get like a bank account. So that's 25% of the world. That often makes like a lot of impression on people from a political background. But also like if they talk about the misconceptions, talking about that is very important as well. Talking about like how the situation really is in terms of like the environmental aspect of it, but also, for example, the criminality rate, etc. Because that's also a major thing. Like a lot of people still are stuck in that 2013 like Silk Road narrative from the very early days of Bitcoin, where people could buy drugs online or even order like assassins on the Silk Road and pay in Bitcoin. So a lot of people still think Bitcoin is for criminals, but if you look at the real numbers, it's going down year after year. Again, Daniel, the trend is going down in terms of criminality rate of Bitcoin. But also you need to be like a stupid criminal to use Bitcoin because it's so transparent. Blockchain technology is so transparent.
Yeah, I would have thought it's the worst way. If you're a criminal, why would you choose a transparent digital ledger? You'd use a non-transparent analog ledger, i.e., just cash, right?
So we all know that best thieves and best criminals on the governments use cash, right? We all know that.
Yeah, true. But I think they start to realize as well, and that's also, I think, why central banks want to introduce CBDCs and get rid of the cash, because that's also a thing. Like a one-liner I always tell people from politics, like, what do you think like people use? What the local drug dealer here on the corner of the street, what does he ask his clients or the people buying drugs from him? He's not going to show his QR code to make a transfer on his Bitcoin wallet. He's not. He's going to take like the cash money. That's it. That's how criminal works. So like the real estimations from the usage of criminality and cash money, for example, is between 2 and 4%. That's what the estimations are. And right now for Bitcoin, in particular, because you cannot count like Monero and all these kind of cryptocurrencies that wouldn't give like a good image. But like the usage of Bitcoin right now is only 0.34% of all transactions are proven to be like having something to do with criminality. So that's a lot lower than the proven transactions of like fiat money in general. So that's also a thing that I always tell like politicians, like, yeah, the thing about the environment is not right. The thing about criminality is not right. There are some more stuff that I tell politicians on why they have it, why they have like these wrong ideas in their head. And I always try to talk about that first, and then of course talk about like the advantages that it can have, like especially the blockchain technology, what advantages this is, but also like that Bitcoin is the first world currency in the history of human beings. There has never been like a currency that is not invented by anyone, that has no political color, that has no national flag, that has no like central authority. That never happened. So this is the logical next step in the evolution of money. And I think that's very important to explain that more into detail. I think we're not going to do that right now, or it's going to take like another hour explaining that. But it makes sense that this is going to be like the next step. And then also they talk about, for example, about volatility. And then I try to explain like, yeah, but this is also something that you cannot be too harsh on. You know, like Bitcoin very soon will be like 14 years old. So Bitcoin is right now not even 14 years old. And it started with zero adoption. So literally zero users, zero value. It doesn't start with like a government adopting it, because that's like a false start, you know? Yeah, of course it's going to be more stable. Of course it's going to be adopted. But it started from zero value. It started from zero adoption. But again, the trend there is very clear. The value is going up, adoption is going up, volatility is going down over the years. And this trend is really, really important to look at, because you cannot be too harsh on something that started from 14 years ago and say like, yeah, but it's too volatile to use it. Of course, it's too volatile to like use it in a stable way right now. You cannot say like this loaf of bread, for example, is X amount of Satoshis. You cannot do that right now because it doesn't make sense. But in like years, for example, and this is going to be a whole different situation. But don't be too harsh on something that has no backing and that started from zero in all aspects of it. And that is very important to explain, for example, politicians as well, but like other people that are very skeptical towards Bitcoin. I think that these things are really important to point out.
Yeah, the other thing is the volatility is trending down. So the trend's going in the right direction. And most people who are using it as a source of everyday exchange, which is mainly the developing world right now, they're not, unless they're living in a country with hyperinflation where they're using it as a store of value, because even though there's volatility, the possibility of upwards and downwards movement from Bitcoin is vastly preferable to the 100% probability of currency devaluation only in a downwards direction, which will occur if they use their local fiat currency. But most people, if there's not hyperinflation, they'll be very quickly just moving it out into their local fiat currency immediately anyway. So they're simply using it as a means where, as you were saying, they're unbanked, so there's no other solutions. or the banks aren't trusted. They can intercept money, they can surveil their money, where they want to not be subject to that government surveillance and censorship.
Yeah, and I want to add something very quickly to that. Like the people who are unbanked, so the 2 billion people who are currently unbanked in our world, most of these people, more than 70% of these people, they have a smartphone, and all they need to do is download the free Bitcoin wallet and they can take part in the financial system. And that's also, I think, why, first of all, Bitcoin solves like a major problem worldwide already for these people. But that's also why I personally believe in DeFi in the long term. Maybe not like the DeFi that we have seen in the first wave of DeFi projects, because a lot of them got like corrupt in some way. There was like a lot of mistakes with the smart contracts. A lot of them failed eventually. But I think there is a future, and it's still like trial and error, of course. But in a few years' time, I truly believe that there will be like a major DeFi project that will also offer like an all-in-one solution. You download the free wallet and you can take part in like a decentralized way of taking insurances, taking loans, etc. And if this is there, this is going to be like a major thing for one, blockchain adoption, but also for crypto adoption.
The other thing I say to people as well is that Bitcoin flips everything on its head, because normally you would have a technology being used in the West first, so cell phone technology, for example, energy infrastructure. We enjoy it in the West first, and then the developing world is last to enjoy it. With Bitcoin, that's the other way around. It's been most highly adopted in countries like Venezuela or El Salvador and Africa, in countries which, as you say, for them, it gives them a chance to leapfrog. And so they can go from a generation one way of exchanging money, which is not even banks, to a generation three, which is purely digital, and miss out the entire analog banking system and get a leap on the rest of the world. So that's incredible, and that's unique. And that's what a lot of people in the West don't understand, because they say, where is its value? And of course, they don't understand its value, number one, because no one's ever told them the value, and the media certainly aren't going to do it. But secondly, because they're not in the developing world. They don't see they don't see that tens of millions of people are already using it. And the second way that it's really flipped everything on its head is the world that I come from, which is the whole technology ecosystem. It's very common that you'll have things which have a lot of volatility, and then gradually that peters out and you get less volatile over time. That's the journey of any technology company. The difference is that you can see that volatility, you can trade it. Like in the early days of Google or Facebook, there's a lot of volatility every single day. There's a lot of emotional volatility. You don't know whether you're going to win or not, but you couldn't trade it until it was public. But imagine if you could have. Imagine if every single startup, you could trade it, you could see its chart. It would look absolutely wild from day to day, from month to month, to year. Whereas Bitcoin, because it's transparent and you can trade it, you can see all that volatility right from scratch. And the second thing that's unique about it is that, normally in the technology world, the venture capitalists, they all get in first, and then retail's the last to get in once a company goes public. Well, Bitcoin's the other way around. Retail got in first. And in fact, institutional investors, they weren't allowed, and in some cases still aren't allowed, until we get more regulatory clarity to come in and invest in Bitcoin. It's only just starting to happen from 2021. So everything kind of gets flipped on its head. And so, you've got a really important job there in terms of educating people where they've got no context, and the assumptions they make about how it works are not only incorrect, but often they're 180 degrees different. So there's a big education piece. So it's important work you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's also exactly the reason why I wrote my book, because I think also if people want to start, for example, educating themselves in crypto, they have no clue where to start, because there's so much information right now from like bad sources as well, from the media, etc. They don't know where to start. So I really wanted to give like people a hands-on book where they can get like all the information that they need, from like the history of money to like why Bitcoin, comparison to gold, altcoins, blockchain technology, like an introduction of everything they need to know. I think that's very important. That's also my project for the community, because You're not going to get rich from writing a book. I know that, but it's something that I did really to educate like people in the Dutch-speaking parts of the world, especially, to give them this, because like you said, education is so important. Misconceptions are still there. A lot of people are stuck in 2013, like the way of thinking in 2013, things that were real then, but aren't real anymore right now, or aren't true anymore. So yeah, education is a major thing, not only for like the average Joe, but also for people in politics, so that they really know what's going on. Because if I talk with people in politics, you see that there is barely anyone who knows something about it. So even on the very highest level of the country, we spoke with all top politicians, at least with one of every party, and it's incredible. You need to go there several times to give them at least a bit of understanding what it is, and to work away the misconceptions, because all of them have these misconceptions, and all of them are like negative about it because of that. And it's hard to get rid of that way of thinking for them. So
what do you think your
education is
strike
key.
rate is? So how many other politicians would you say would come across and would become advocates, versus how many would become, well, maybe not, and how many would just stick to their guns with their own initial negative misconceptions?
I think it really depends on the age of politicians. That's what I noticed. So politicians who are in the, let's say, late days of their career, they are often like sticking to their initial conceptions about what Bitcoin is, that it is bad, all these things that we talked about already.
Yeah, so the Warren Buffetts of politics, they don't tend to change their tune, huh?
Exactly. And that's really frustrating. But then you have some younger politicians who also see what's happening around them, and they're the people that they know, their friends, their family, who are doing something with crypto. Because let's be honest, I think everyone right now has someone in their families or friends group that is doing something with crypto. So you see that there is more willingness to learn about it, and there's also more willingness to change their opinion on things. And I think that's very important. That's something that I really noticed, that the younger politicians are more open towards changing their minds about this. But still, it's very hard. There's still a difference between being somehow a bit positive about it and taking real action to build like a good legal framework for it. Because all these parties that we talked about, we really like making some good legal framework, because of course it's different in every country, but in Belgium there's no legal framework at all. There, even tax wise, it's like pure gray zone, and nobody's taking like the responsibility, the action to make like a decent legal framework. I think they're waiting for MiCA, and probably then they're going to build something, but at least we tried our best already to push them in a certain direction.
If you think about that, sorry to comment. I do think that, it's part of that kind of like comes from this overall uncertainty, right? I mean, we cannot predict the future. We don't know where the Bitcoin is going to be in the next couple of years, not to mention next 2028. And speaking of which, as we have about 10 minutes to wrap now, let's speculate at it a little bit, right? Perhaps it's going to be better, perhaps it's going to be worse for Bitcoin, but it's all supposedly to be based on speculations eventually. We don't know the future, but what do you imagine the future to be, Daniel and Quentin, on the, again, Bitcoin in 2028? Where is going to Bitcoin be at that time?
Well, I'll tackle the mining side, because that's the side that I know a little bit more about. So when you look at what's happening with, and this is interesting and relevant, because a lot of people say, hey, are there going to be more mining capitulations? Some people say things such as, well, what happens if Bitcoin doesn't go up enough in price and you've got multiple halvings? Will it still be profitable to do mining? Is there a risk that the network becomes vulnerable because people won't want to come into it anymore? And will it become more centralized, because it started off decentralized, seems to be getting too centralized? So I can give some insights into those things. And also, what is the energy mix going to be in the future? So what's happening right now is that any new industry, with time, it becomes more and more commoditized. So mining is the same. So when you started off, you had this massive difference where the cost to mine Bitcoin was vastly less than the cost to buy it. But over time, a lot of those inefficiencies, like any new market, are going away. So what it means is it's actually going to become a more and more low margin business throughout bull and bear cycles. That's the first thing. Second thing is the sources of electricity. They're going to become cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And so what that's going to mean is stranded and wasted sources of electricity. And where is waste? Well, waste is going to be curtailed solar and wind, number one. Curtailed hydro. It's going to be from waste products such as landfills, such as wastewater. And so it's definitely, now the great thing about this is all of these sources are either carbon negative or carbon neutral. So this is one trend. The second thing that's going to happen is it's going to become more decentralized. So I don't think you're going to have a whole lot of, you have some, but you're going to have, as well as those large enterprise level mining organizations, you're going to have a lot of smaller, like 1 to 5, 1 to 10 megawatts in places all around the world, basically wherever there's some stranded energies. It's going to become more decentralized. And the other thing that's going to happen is it's going to trend towards carbon neutral and even carbon negative as it uses vented methane-based mining increasingly. And the reason it's going to go more vented methane, number one, that's the only one that the White House is actually giving a good environmental rap to lately. So it was pretty down on every sort of crypto mining, apart from if it was using vented methane, which says, yeah, that can actually help us meet our climate goals. The second reason is that Bitcoin mining companies are increasingly, not just the new ones, but the existing ones as well, they're moving towards it because it improves their ESG credentials, because it makes them more palatable to investors. They can legitimately say, hey, we're carbon neutral or carbon negative. And the other reason is it just makes better economic sense to be using these sources that the marginal cost of power is zero or close to zero because you're using something which is wasted. And then what I also see is that as Bitcoin mining increasingly moves in this direction, once it's actually paid for that initial cost to build a mining facility, such as a mining facility on a landfill, and we have a generator which is turning methane into electricity, and then you use that electricity for Bitcoin mining, what's going to happen more and more is that once that has paid for itself, once it's paid back its capital investment, then that energy can be used for other stuff. So then suddenly cost equations which didn't make sense, such as should we build out the grid infrastructure so we can sell it back to the grid? Once you've paid off the original capital investment, suddenly those equations change and it might make sense. So you could sell it back to the grid. Or you could use it for on-site charging of EVs, of electronic machinery for the trucks that are on the landfills, for example. So you're going to see Bitcoin mining, which is used more and more to facilitate other technologies that otherwise it would not have been possible, would not have been economic, would not have been scalable. And then it can move to some other area, or it can just play arbitrage and say, hey, at this time of day, it's profitable to sell it to the grid. And at this time of day, based on the price of Bitcoin, the price of wholesale electricity, etc., it makes sense to do Bitcoin mining with it. So those are some of the areas that I see Bitcoin mining evolving in the future. It's going to be more green. It's actually going to become carbon negative within, by my calculations, into 2024. So that's exciting. It's going to become more decentralized, and it's going to become more of what Troy Cross calls the dung beetle, which is just, it's looking for sources of stuff, which is wasted, which is a pollutant, and it's actually using the product of emissions in order to have a source of power. So it's going to be a tremendous net positive to the environment.
It's really crazy that like in less than 2 years, we're going to be neutral in your calculations. That's really nice.
It's happening really fast.
That's what I was inspired the last time I spoke to Daniel as well. That was a game changer. Like,
wow,
some switches turned on, on my side.
Yeah, in 5 years, look, quite honestly, everyone who's putting out an environmental FUD about Bitcoin right now, they're going to be feeling pretty sheepish. And there'll be a lot of people deleting a lot of tweets and deleting a lot of blog posts and deleting a lot of media articles, because it's just, once the data starts to keep on trending, it just is going to become, it's already becoming harder, but it's going to become harder and harder and harder to continue to push an anti-environment message against Bitcoin. So people, of course, they'll switch to other things, as you found, and as it becomes harder to push every narrative, it's not going to stop them trying. They'll just look for new angles.
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
like if Elon Musk is watching your stream, Adrian, then he should accept like Bitcoin already again for Tesla, because he promised if you're above 50%, then he is going to be accepting it again. But I heard from Daniel that it's already at 59 regarding like the council, and own calculations also say 50%. So yeah, message to Elon, please accept Bitcoin again. It's time.
I love it. I fully endorse it, man. And I honestly wish Elon actually watched this one. We'll see about that. I'll do my best. Gentlemen, I think this has been a very, very well spent 50 minutes already to the show. And for everybody who's watching, we are talking and actually wrapping up the show about the future of Bitcoin. We've been speculating a little bit about what may potentially be not in so much 2024, but within the next cycle or within the cycle after this one that is coming. This is quite distant, right? And we are hearing really, really promising insights actually from Daniel and Quentin as well. Driven not only by some expectations against corrupted establishment that we are facing on day in day out, but also on this actual environmental approach as we get greener. And this definitely, with the technological advantage and advance that we all see and experience, may be even more favorable over the time. And gentlemen, I definitely appreciate your time and generosity of wealth you shared with us so far. For all the viewers and listeners, just so that I don't forget, make sure you rush like in one army and go ahead and push the follow button on Daniel's account. You can find his handle at dsbattenwt, at dsbattenwt. And for Quentin, it's going to be found under Quentin Francois. You can definitely, do I pronounce it even well?
You pronounce it perfectly.
Perfectly. So it's Quentin Francois. That's his handle. That's his friend handle. Probably the most French name you could figure out. So there's little chance to actually just figure it out wrongly.
And I don't even speak French very well, but that aside.
Look at you, and you don't even speak French. You're still my best friend. Don't worry about that. I'll take you as you are. Last final question. We have this cool chance and opportunity for our viewers to give a 1 minute each golden takeaway and view for the viewers, basically, that you want to leave them with. Let's start with Quentin.
I would say use this time in the markets. Like, first of all, you guys are legends that you're still like watching educational content right now, because I know it's hard in a bear market to stay interested in the topic, but you're all going to make it if you keep on pushing for more knowledge, deep understanding of how this industry is evolving, where it is going to, what the potential is of Bitcoin, and of course some other cryptocurrencies as well. But just keep learning, because a bear market is a good time to learn, is a good time to prepare for the next bull market, because a bull market is going to be too chaotic, too emotionally, you're going to be like too emotional to prepare some stuff. So make a good plan, make sure that your knowledge is on point, that you have deep understanding, deep belief, and just keep on believing in where we're going to, because personally, I am convinced that in 5 years, in 2028, we're going to have like major adoption. We're going to keep on following the adoption trend of the internet, which we're perfectly following right now already. So yeah, I mean, like, you guys are all going to make it because you're watching this right now in a bear market, depths of a bear market. So nice.
Beautiful words. Beautiful words. What do we have to finish and wrap the show from Daniel?
Yeah, it's like preparation before game day, isn't it? And there's so much you can learn. For me, I would just say feel grateful that you're part of this history in the making, and you're one of the early adopters, because we're still so early. And maybe you're feeling, hey, I got into this late, but actually, if you look at the global trend, we are so early in adoption right now. And that everything you're learning about this incredible area is teaching you so much, because when you go down the rabbit hole, you end up finding out not only about Bitcoin, but you end up finding about politics, about media, about how money works, about how financial system works, about how people work, about how misinformation works. You end up finding about human rights movements. You end up finding out about the French colonial system in Africa, the Central African franc. You end up finding out so much. I mean, I joke to people sometimes, but maybe it's not a joke because someone's actually already done it. You could start a school and the only topic would be Bitcoin. And you would actually learn about every single subject: history, economics, physics, mathematics, politics, philosophy, you name it, media studies. So keep learning, absolutely, and also keep sharing what you're learning with other people, because that's going to teach you a lot about how you communicate ideas, particularly when it's new ideas that people just aren't familiar with.
What a beautiful statement up there. Ladies and gentlemen, the future of Bitcoin apparently seems to be brighter, much more than not. And this is all thanks to this full, beautiful statement and faith testimony almost coming from Daniel Batten, our today's guest, as well as Quentin Francois, my dear friends, whom I cannot wait to welcome them to the show yet another time on another occasion anytime soon. Thank you so much for coming over to the Free Trading Congress. And for everybody again who's watching that, make sure you hit the follow button, smash that notification, likes, drop some comments as well and questions if you have any for Daniel, for Quentin, or for me, for the Burbness team. We're going to make sure to review them and come up and cover as many as possible. And to our great speakers, guests, thank you so much, Daniel and Quentin. What an amazing journey it's been today. Thank you.
Thanks for having us on.
Thanks for having us, Adrian. And thank you, Daniel, as well, because it was very insightful for me as well. Really nice to hear all this stuff.
Likewise.
Beautiful. Only good vibes. Gentlemen, enjoy rest of your day. Everybody have a blessed day. And I roll in the next show in a couple of seconds. God bless. Bye-bye. Thank you.